Very happy and proud to have as the keynote speaker this afternoon, Mr. Robert Azzi, a person that I have the pleasure of saying I've known for I don't know how many years has it been, well, probably more than 20, I suppose. The bio that he has here is actually worth your reading because it will give you a picture of how diverse his connections have been and how committed a human being he has been, not just simply in the area of trying to improve relations between average Americans who know, frankly, as you know, so little about Islam, but also just simply he has been committed to justice on multiple fronts. I've had the pleasure of knowing him at Phillips Exeter Academy, where he has helped not only our student body and also our administration, other instructors, but obviously helped lots of students get into a more knowledgeable place. Again, not only just simply about issues related to Muslims and Islam, but also in terms of justice more broadly. And you will see the kinds of recognitions that he has won as a professional photographer and photojournalist. So I leave this longer statement for your perusal and invite you to come and talk with him afterward. You will find him a very open, warm, and engaging person. I don't know why you're still sitting in your chair. I have been talking all this time, which should have given you enough time to get up here, but you're still there. He is also, are you coming or what? He is also a father, an activist, and a gadfly, and oftentimes, when everything else fails, just simply a nuisance. But he is a golden man that I feel so very glad to be able to count as friend and a person that you would love to have in the trenches with you.
Thank you. I stayed sitting, Russell, because I like hearing all those things about me. Also, I'm trying to put as much space as possible between Sister Ava and myself. Whoever schedules me next time, I go before her. Assalamu alaikum. Peace. Shalom. Several years ago, at a religious retreat in Garrison, New York, a friend of mine was having a quiet coffee with civil rights activist and historian Vincent Harding. "You seem a bit down today," she said. "I miss Martin a lot. You know, I wrote Beyond Vietnam, the speech he gave at Riverside Church in 1967. I believe that speech got Martin killed." "Did he work with you on the speech? Did he agree with the ideas you wrote?" "Yes." "His death's not on you, Vincent. You didn't get Dr. King killed." That speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, delivered on April 4th, 1967, 1 year to the day before King was assassinated, denounced the Vietnam War, compared American bombings in Indochina to Nazi atrocities, and called for America's unilateral withdrawal. The problems eroding America in 1967, King said, were, quote, "the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism," unquote. And as a Christian, he had to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation. It was Dr. King's most radical call, and one of its most radical points was that the victims of our nation included the oppressed beyond our borders. Black leaders like Ralph Bunche and the NAACP distanced themselves from King because of fears of offending President Johnson. LBJ himself never spoke to King again. Washington Post and New York Times editorials called King's Riverside Church speech a mistake. It was no mistake. It was a prophetic moment. It was perhaps his most radical call for social transformation. Anti-war and pro-social justice, it recognized, long before the word existed, the intersectionality of struggle and conflict of oppressed peoples around the world. It wasn't just about black versus white. It was about justice and equity, dignity and respect, rights and honor, and called upon us all to confront injustice in the name of the weak and the voiceless. It was the 99% rising to confront the 1%. It was to confront the privileged and powerful and hold them accountable. That MLK, the man who spoke truth to power on April 4th, 1967, is the MLK I look to today. The man who called upon the beloved community to fulfill the covenants to which it's been called. Today we are all part of that beloved community. There are no outsiders. There are those who embrace the community and those who resist it, but who still belong. Toward them we project our embrace and understanding. We all belong. I was born here in Manchester, born at a time when words like intersectionality, proportionality, and cultural appropriation were unknown. At a time when most Americans, like those here in Manchester, believed that the normative American experience was based in Maybury and witnessed weekly on Leave It to Beaver and Donna Reed. The Manchester I grew up in was white, both at Bakersville Grammar School and Manchester Central. There were only 2 public high schools then. I believed everyone to be white. I even grew up thinking I was white amidst Lebanese and Syrian, Greek, Italian, French, Canadian, Polish, Irish, and other communities. Weekly, the Lebanese and Syrian community gathered on Cedar Street at the Lebanese American Society, where the women baked, the men played cards, and children ran around picking up tidbits of Arabic, usually swear words, from parents who desperately wanted their children to be assimilated. I remember no Bhutanese or Bosnians, no Nepalese, Congolese, or Rwandans. Today, I await the arrival of Syrian refugees for whom we have responsibility. I remember, too, no African Americans or Hispanics. I knew there was the North End and the West Side. I knew where you lived marked to a great extent who people thought you were. No one had to tell you that. You just knew. Just that you knew that Central High had 2 buildings, classical and practical arts, and where you took most of your classes determined who you were. I remember especially the summer after my senior year. I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift as a roving frame tender in the Wambach Mills. Took the bus home, showered and changed, and went to work at Jim's Mint Shop on Hanover Street. Louis Georgopoulos and his family were the first Greeks I ever knew. And some nights I worked as a soda jerk at the Puritan Drive-In on the Daniel Webster Highway North. And today, I'm back here on Martin Luther King's and my birthday. What a treat. Thank you. I had left Manchester in 1960 and after college returned here to work. In January 1968, I was whisked away by a charismatic St. Thomas Aquinas quoting senator from Minnesota, Eugene McCarthy, who came to New Hampshire to challenge President Lyndon Johnson and LBJ's criminal prosecution of the Vietnam War. I met McCarthy, was hired by Cy Hirsch to be McCarthy's personal photographer, and left the Granite State, clean for Gene. Other than for visits, I was away for over 20 years. I was with McCarthy when we got the news that MLK had been assassinated. He went directly to Memphis and then to Atlanta, and I was sent to Washington. There wasn't enough money in the campaign coffers to bring a photographer along, and I'm sorry to admit that as a young man from White, New Hampshire, I was less than fully aware at that moment what King's life and death meant. I admit I came late to King and issues of social justice. When friends asked me to go to Washington with them for the March on Washington, I demurred because, this is the first time I've told the story, I finally had a date with a girl I'd been eyeing for some time, and I didn't want to give it up. Finally, though, April 4th, 1968, our communal turning point, reinforced shortly afterwards when RFK was assassinated in Los Angeles, and shortly after that when Mayor Daley's thugs tried to crush demonstrations in Chicago's Grant Park at the Democratic National Convention. 68 was a tough year, and that fall I left for the Middle East anxious to find my roots, anxious to get away from the madness that had consumed my country the previous 9 months, and frankly, kind of madness that I'm finding a reflection in today that Sister Ava expressed so well for all of us. In that departure in 68, I was able to come home again. A boy who had gone to the First Congregational Church in Manchester with his Aunt Lulu, had attended Melkite services with his family, and had been confirmed that the Blessed Sacrament Church has returned here today as an Arab-American Muslim who believes that there is one beloved community and that we are all part of it whether we know it or not. Archbishop Desmond Tutu expands on this idea of community as a gift with the African insight of Ubuntu. Ubuntu, he tells us, states clearly that to be is to be we, not I. That we can only understand ourselves in the face of the other. He says, it is the essence of being human. It speaks of the fact that my humanity is caught up with and is inextricably bound with yours. I am human because I belong. It speaks about wholeness. It speaks about compassion. That the only way to understand myself, my name, my face, is through the roadmap of your name, your face, and the faces of your ancestors. The Quran tells us, O men, behold, we have created you out of a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes, so that you may come to know each other. Verily, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the one who is most deeply conscious of him. Behold, God is all-knowing, all-aware. We are here, you and I, so that we may know each other. In Islam, we believe that every person is born with fitra, an innate goodness that encompasses intelligence and compassion that comes from our Creator. I guess the closest word in English would be soul. Fitra cannot be destroyed. It can be covered up, resisted, ignored, but it cannot be destroyed. While it's parents who determine whether a child grows up to be Christian, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, secular, humanist, fitra is the attribute, the gift from God, the fundamental goodness that we all share as humans. Fitra, I believe, is what connects us within the beloved community. Healthy community needs the other, the different, even the strange, to find its path to justice and peace. And the beloved community is so much greater than our individual parts. To Muslims, prepare for it, this is true jihad. The struggle to reach into our soul and connect with our fitra, to connect with each other. This was MLK's jihad. This is our jihad. It is to bring together the beloved community, to serve each other, to serve God, to understand each other in the face of each other. Our struggle today, as MLK recognized and as Junot Diaz has written, is that, quote, you don't love a country by turning a blind eye to its crimes and to a problem. The way that you love a country is by seeing everything that it's done wrong, all of its mistakes, and still thinking that it's beautiful and it's worthy. I'm sure Dr. King believed, that America is beautiful and worthy. That believes so strongly in America that he gave his life for it. That's why we will leave here today, and we will continue his struggle. Today, even as we honor a prophet, we struggle still to make sense of political tensions currently roiling America. I can't help you understand Donald Trump, but I think it would be helpful to contextualize our communal experience especially with regard to Islam and religion in the public square, because we've heard so much about it in the past months. I believe the rise of virulent Islamophobia, over 450 incidents in 2015 alone, compels us to understand that Muslims did not just arrive in America on 9/11 like Topsy, speaking a language no one knew, professing a religion few knew any about, but that they've been part of a historical and cultural experience for nearly 400 years. Muslims got here before the Mayflower. Perhaps 1/3 of American slaves were Muslim. Many converted to Christianity by supposedly God-fearing slave owners. Today, 1/3 of all Muslims in America are African Americans. In 1706, Cotton Mather, a Puritan church minister in Boston, and the son of Increase Mather, president of Harvard College, received a present from his congregation. They bought him as slave. That's right. A Christian church bought a preacher of the Word of God, a slave, a living human being, as a present. Mather named him Onesimus after the runaway slave found in Paul's epistle to Philemon. Writing in 1716, Mather described how Onesimus had revealed to him a method of smallpox inoculation that, quote, "Whoever had ye courage to use it was forever free from ye fear of the contagion. He described the operation to me and showed me in his arm a scar." In 1721, despite opposition, Mather used that knowledge, acquired from Onesimus and supported by other foreign sources, to advocate for mass inoculation when a smallpox epidemic struck Boston. Many at Harvard's Divinity School opposed inoculation because only sinners got smallpox. And many at Harvard's medical school opposed inoculation because it wasn't Western medicine. Thankfully, Mather prevailed, and as a result, the preacher best known for the inflammatory role in provoking the hysteria and intolerance of the Salem witch trials, who himself had often excoriated Muslims as Mohammedan Turks and Moors and devils, acted on the basis of Onesimus' knowledge of smallpox and saved perhaps thousands of people in the Boston area. Onesimus was not saved. He remained a slave. Only after failed attempts to convert his Muslim slave to Christianity did Mather allow Onesimus to buy his freedom, cruelly conditioning his release by insisting that even as a free man, he remain available to shovel snow, pile firewood, fetch water, and carry corn for Mather. Mather was deaf to Paul's message about that slave named Onesimus in the epistle to Philemon. Though Paul urged Philemon to accept Onesimus, quote, "not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved," unquote, Mather, his mind colonized by the institution of slavery, worshiped the profane rather than the sacred and the Word of God. Mather, to the very end, failed to acknowledge the humanity of the man who had saved much of Boston. While there are many contradictions between the limited privileges of a nation built upon the exploitation of slaves like Onesimus and a nation whose founding fathers aspired to be created upon enlightenment principles espousing belief that all men are created equal, we have certainly moved from the exploitation, prejudice, and hysteria of Mather's days closer to fulfilling the aspirations of peoples yearning to be free, at least in the promise. We just haven't moved far enough, and now we're threatened with the rolling back of many of those gains on healthcare, housing, voting rights, employment, equal justice, and the list goes on and on. We haven't moved close enough to fulfill the aspiration of Theophilus Parsons, one of the authors of the 1780 Massachusetts Constitution, that America was designed to ensure, quote, "the most ample of liberty of conscience for deists, Mohammedans, Jews, and Christians," unquote. In 1842, missionary Charles Colcock Jones wrote that many Mohammedan Africans had found ways in America to accommodate Islam within their new lives in bondage. God, they say, is Allah, and Jesus Christ is Muhammad. The religion is the same, but different countries have different names. Well, Jones didn't get the theology exactly right, but he recognized an essential truth that many Muslims and their descendants found ways to overcome the systematic proselytization and cruelty of slave owners, both to sustain their Islamic faith and embrace the aspirations of this new nation. Muslims fought and died in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Muslims died in the Twin Towers on 9/11 and died as first responders trying to rescue the victims of that terrorism. From within America's slaves to early immigrants who built a mosque out of sod on the North Dakota plains to the millions of Americans who daily contribute in commerce, education, arts, and the security of this nation, Muslims are tightly woven into our common fabric, and that's a good thing. Dwight Eisenhower, at the Islamic Center of Washington dedication in 1957, eloquently affirmed America's bedrock principle of religious freedom, quote, "America would fight with her whole strength for your right to have here your own mosque and worship according to your own conscience. This concept is indeed a part of America, and without that concept, we would be something else other than what we are." I'm going to interrupt for a quick story, which I didn't write down. I'm going to add an extra minute here. There's a wonderful story. The Islamic Center in Washington was built by a guy named Yusuf Hawa. He showed up at Ellis Island once, a poor man from Palestine, and the immigration authority said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to America." And they said, no, you have to have a name somewhere. Where are you going? And Yusuf Hawa said, "Where does your president live?" He said, "He lives in Washington. Write down that I'm moving to Washington." Joseph Hawa moved to Washington, became a successful builder and real estate entrepreneur, and he built the first mosque in Washington, D.C. that stands still on Massachusetts Avenue. That's the promise of America. Islam's not just a religion. It's not just the faith of slaves, of immigrants, and of many African Americans reclaiming and naming it as their own, as did Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. It's part of who we are. In an America of diversity, pluralism, and individual freedom, we should recognize that Islam is part of our national patrimony and that that's a good thing. And it's because we think America is worthy, we who are gathered here today, we who have struggled together for this day, that until a few years ago, white privileged New Hampshire didn't believe we were worthy of celebrating. That we should stand and celebrate not only Dr. King, Malcolm, and Muhammad, but we celebrate the Khan family and Beyonce. We celebrate Olympic medalist Ibtihaj Muhammad and Trayvon and Ta-Nehisi Coates and Barack Obama, and here in our present Sister Ava. And among his wonders, the Quran tells us, is this: he creates for you mates so that you may incline toward him, and he engenders love and tenderness between you. In this, behold, there are messages indeed for people who think. This is the beloved community, and there is room for all. And in that room are Jews and Christians and Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims and Wiccans. In that room are all who believe in freedom and justice. An anti-Semitic act is an act on all of us. The rending of a muhajjaba's headscarf is a tearing of all of our communal fabric. The desecration of a church scars us all, and the denying of LGBTQIA people's rights to affirm identity denies all of us our names. Yet there is some hope. Last August, two cultural events came together to highlight what I believe is an emerging social movement happening in spite of the Trump phenomenon. The first was when quarterback Colin Kaepernick of the San Francisco 49ers refused to stand for the national anthem. The second was when Beyoncé, who had rocked the Super Bowl months earlier, brought a few mothers of police violence victims to the MTV Video Music Awards ceremonies. These two events are connected in part through the social activism of Black Lives Matter, the grassroots civil rights movement that originated in the African American community in 2013 after George Zimmerman's acquittal in the shooting of Trayvon Martin, and gained momentum following the deaths of Michael Brown in Ferguson and Eric Garner in New York. Out of these tragic conflicts arose the movement for Black Lives Manifesto, M4BL, a coalition of more than 60 organizations. The coalition issued, quote, 6 demands aimed at ending all forms of violence and injustice endured by Black people, redirecting resources from prisons and military to education, health, and safety, creating a just, democratically controlled economy, and securing Black political power within a genuinely inclusive democracy. M4BL is a new manifestation of a courageous, principled, and globally informed generation of civil rights uprisings, picking up from where Dr. King and the civil rights movement of the 1960s left off, and it declared its support for the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in the Middle East. I think Dr. King would approve. I think he would recognize the intersectionality of today's conflicts and inequities, just as he recognized on April 4th, 1968, the intersectionality of oppression and that the victims of our nation were not confined to within our borders. I received an email this morning from Rabbi Arthur Waskow, which read, quote, Dr. Martin Luther King stood up in the face of evil and said, "No, we cannot keep doing this to each other. We are not each other's enemies." He answered Paul's call to arms, the weapons being the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. I think today Dr. King would tell us that that those are the weapons, how to resist, that no matter how long it takes, no matter how dark it gets, fight back. Resist. Resist by helping the people who are being threatened with the loss of rights. Stand up for women's rights to their own bodies, to safety, and to equal pay. Declare that the resistance is an act of love for all our sisters and brothers. Declare that the exclusion of one is the exclusion of all. Stand up for freedom, because standing up for the separation of powers, for a strong and independent judiciary, for safeguards for civil society and a free press, and for the sanctity and fairness of the electoral process is an act of love. We must begin, King told us in 1967, we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Today, 3 months shy of 50 years from that prophetic call for a shift in American priorities, we are threatened still. As one who lives as the other in this land called America, the land of the free, I welcome all of you, whom these politicians are attempting to marginalize and demonize. Let us work together to defend this land of great beauty and power, of freedom and opportunity that our forebears and families have fought to build and defend. We will grow by looking to the future with optimism, not with fear. Welcome to the place where I live still with hope, where Dr. King still holds vigil. If we lock up Martin Luther King, Vincent Harding told us, and make him available for where we are now so we can keep ourselves comfortably distant from the realities he was trying to grapple with, we waste King. That's the key for the 21st century, to answer the voice within us, as it was within Martin, which says, do something for somebody. Men do not get assassinated for wanting children of different colors to hold hands on a mountainside, Harding said. King was telling us to make America what it needs to be. We still have a voice today, a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Assalamu alaikum.